My name is Ines and I'm 37 years old. I'm a freelance photographer. In the summer of 2010, I traveled from Guatemala City to Lake Atitlan. I planned to document the life and customs of the communities settled around it. My colleagues insisted that this place was marked by volcanoes and surrounded by an almost mystical beauty. It would be the perfect setting for a photographic series I could exhibit in Europe. I was eager to explore every corner and soak up the legends surrounding the lake. What I never imagined was that on that trip I would find more than beautiful landscapes. I arrived in Panajacal on a Saturday morning. I still remember the first time I saw the lake from the road. A deep blue blanket surrounded by green volcanoes that seemed to guard an ancient treasure. The atmosphere was cool and slightly humid. On the pier, where tourists and boatmen gathered, English, French, German, and Spanish intermingled. However, what most caught my attention was the presence of women in their traditional costumes and colorful embroidery selling textiles and handicrafts. I stayed in a modest inn near the pier. It was run by a woman named Teresa, a middle-aged woman who was attentive and always smiling. After packing my luggage and taking a shower, I went out to find food and browse. The plan was to take some photographs and chat with the locals to plan my trip around the lake. On one of those trips, I met Tomas. He was a local guide and dressed in cloth pants, a simple shirt, and a short-brimmed hat. He offered to take me to different villages along the Ribera. Along the way, he could also tell me stories and legends he knew from his childhood. I immediately bonded with him. He was a kind person and seemed to enjoy sharing the secrets of his homeland. That same afternoon, while talking with Tomas, I learned about the legend that many locals called the guardian of the lake. According to what he told me, it was a spirit or ancient entity that lived in the depths and that people described it in different ways. Some, for example, saw it as a tall, pale man, others as a being with the features of an aquatic animal. Its supposed purpose: to ensure that the waters remained pure and that the inhabitants honored the lake with respect. On nights with a full moon, they say a strange light can be seen moving over the water, Tomas recounted. Some claim that the guardian comes to the shore and that these whispers attract those who wander alone. I asked him if he believed in that story and he looked at me with a mixture of skepticism and fear. I don't know if the guardian thing is true, but the lake holds many mysteries. My sister disappeared here a few years ago. We never found her, and for the family, it represented that the lake swallowed her up. Since then, I haven't looked at these waters the same way. His words shook me. At that moment, I only saw the picturesque place full of life, but his eyes reflected a deep pain. I asked him if he could take me from San Pedro to Santiago Atitlan. I wanted to start my journey as soon as possible and was curious to continue. Hearing stories like these, the next day, early in the morning, we took a boat from Panajacal to Santiago Atitlan, one of the largest towns on the riverbank. The crossing was easy, the water was calm, and the reflection of the volcanoes on the blue surface gave the impression of a double horizon. I took out my camera and started shooting non-stop. I wanted to capture every moment. Tomas pointed out the San Pedro volcano and told me stories about eruptions and ancient rituals. Upon arrival, we walked through the streets. Main features: there was a lively atmosphere. Street vendors, tuk-tuks offering rides, women selling fresh fruit, and children running around playing. I took the time to photograph the traditional costumes and daily life of local families. Later, we sat down to lunch near the main square. Tomas taught me a few words in the regional dialect. It was a truly productive day. By nightfall, my memory card was full of images of the town and its inhabitants. Yet in the back of my mind, the guardian's story continued to haunt me, especially as I approached the shore and gazed at the water, now tinged with gold by the sun. We returned to Panajacal at dusk. I was exhausted, but something in me refused to stay at the inn. I decided to walk for a while along the beach by the pier before going to sleep. The night was pitch black. I could barely make out a few dim lights and distant boats. The silhouette of the volcanoes was imposing. Shortly before 10 o'clock, I felt as if someone were whispering my name, Ines Ines. I spun around, convinced there was no one there. A chill ran down my spine. I could hear music from a bar in the distance, but even with another nearby sound, I didn't consider that perhaps fatigue was playing tricks on me. Anyway, I decided to leave the inn, my legs slightly trembling. That night I slept uneasily. I dreamed of deep waters and a voice calling me from the depths of the lake. Neither male nor female, it was as if they were forming overlapping echoes. I woke up at dawn with a bad feeling I couldn't shake. The next day, Tomas and I set off for San Juan de la Laguna and then San Pedro de la Laguna, towns also on the lakeshore. In San Juan, I met a local painter who sold vibrant paintings depicting scenes from Mayan life. As part of my interviews, I asked him about the famous guardian and if he believed the legend. The painter, who called himself Manuel, took a moment before answering me. My grandmother used to say that the lake was alive and that sometimes it called out. What was hers? She wasn't talking about a being like a man, a monster, but about the energy of the lake. If you offend it or show it no respect, the lake will eventually claim you. Every time someone disappeared into the water, my grandmother would assure me that the lake had trapped them. I noticed that when he said those words, Manuel wasn't joking. He was saying it with grave conviction, as if it were part of his family history. I left him sitting there in front of his canvases and began walking, feeling a nervous tingling in the pit of my stomach. Later, in San Pedro de la Laguna, I spoke with a community guide. He told me that there had been several drownings in recent years. Many guides attributed these deaths to underground currents, which could drag people away, but there were also those who insisted that at dusk the lake whispered names, inviting people to enter the waters. That story made my skin crawl, since just the night before I had felt someone whispering to me. One of my personal goals beyond work was to take a photo that would capture the mystery of the lake. It may sound a bit romantic, but I dreamed of capturing something beyond the purely touristy, perhaps a silent misty sunrise or the reflection of a moon on the surface. I resolved to get up early in the morning to look for that perfect snapshot. However, Tomas, always practical, warned me, "Ines, please don't go out alone on the shore so late. There are people who get drunk and there are plenty of them. Also, the rumors about the whispers were also malicious. I don't know, better yet, you always have to be accompanied." At that time, as he called me, adapting my name to his way of speaking, I smiled and told him not to worry, that I'd be careful. Deep down, a part of me was drawn to the idea of hearing again the rumor that had frozen my blood. I wanted to capture it with my journalist recorder. I had to discover the supernatural hidden in those waters, or perhaps it was all mere suggestion. 2 days later, I decided to stay in San Pedro de la Laguna. I'd been taking photos of people selling food on the street and travelers playing music in the bars. Around 10 a.m., I left the lit area and headed toward a secondary dock where there was hardly anyone. The night was clear, tracing a silvery path across the lake. I turned on my recorder and held it somewhat nervously. I hoped to record any strange sounds. The water was as still as a mirror. My footsteps echoed on the wood of the dock. When I reached the end, I sat down, letting my feet dangle near the surface. A few minutes passed in silence. I was beginning to believe I was just making a fool of myself, chasing ghost stories before bed. That's when I felt it, a tingling running down the back of my neck. Something brushed the air, a whisper I couldn't clearly distinguish. I leaned forward, holding my breath. The sound intensified, echoing inside my head like a hypnotic call. I couldn't quite understand the words, but I knew they were words. I only instinctively rose with the feeling that someone was calling me from the water. My heart was pounding and I thought for a second about reaching for the surface, but a primal fear stopped me. I glanced into the darkness and saw only something stretched out before me. At that moment I wanted to escape, but my legs felt stiff. That's when I heard with absolute clarity something that sounded very similar to my name. It was floating in the air. The sound hit my mind like a soft but persistent, velvety thunderclap. Suddenly reality hit. Hearing hurried footsteps behind me, it was Tomas who came running with a flashlight. Agitated, he said, "Ines, are you okay? I've been looking for you." Her screams brought me out of my trance. I took several steps back. I ended up falling. Out of place on the dock. The recorder was still on, shaking in my hand. Without saying anything, Tomas helped me to my feet. We both moved away from the shore as quickly as we could. "I'm not doing this again. Now," I warned him. "It's no small feat. I just wanted to know if what they were saying was true," I admitted with my voice. Trembling, I heard something, "Tomas," a whisper. I almost felt like he was calling me. He then told me his sister's story. He did so with more detail than the first time. My sister's name was Bullen and she was 18. One night she went for a walk along the shore near our house. She never returned. Several neighbors said they saw her entering the water as if she had been bewitched. Some claimed they heard laughter or voices, and then she disappeared into the darkness. I listened to him silently, with a lump in my throat. It was hard not to connect his story with what I had just felt on the dock. Still, I had no proof. That recorder, upon reviewing it later, only recorded a faint murmur and then my labored breathing. No one listening to that audio would ever believe it was a human voice seeking answers. I began to predict that we would return to Santiago Tlatelolco to speak with an old man. People considered this man a kind of wise man. The local cham lived on the outskirts of town in a small adobe house surrounded by fruit trees. Gregorio, as we called him, greeted us with a friendly gesture and offered us a seat in the courtyard. The first thing I noticed was his deep, calm gaze, as if he knew stories from many centuries ago. I explained what I was looking for: testimony about the whispering in the lake and the supposed entity that inhabited its depths. He sighed deeply, lit an incense, and began to speak in a slow Spanish that was even mixed with some dialect. People speak to the guardian. The elders say that they used to offer him water. Rituals for the people of old. Water was sacred. With the arrival of new customs and the loss of respect, that entity became irritable. When someone comes with a broken heart, with malice or undue curiosity, he calls them and sometimes takes them away. It could just be dangerous currents, I asked, trying to find a more rational explanation. Currents exist, but I've seen things that can't be explained with simple logic. Years ago, I helped search for the body of a young man, his friends said. They saw him walk toward the water as if in a trance. He never appeared, not even floating, as if the lake had swallowed him whole. The old man then fixed his eyes on me with overwhelming seriousness. If the lake has called you, girl, be careful. This place is a mirror of the soul. It reflects your fears, your guilt, and your longings. There are very ancient beings and energies here. If your heart isn't strong, they might take advantage of your weakness. That afternoon, I returned to my lodgings with my head spinning. I couldn't stop thinking about the whisper I had heard inside me. I felt a mixture of fascination and fear. I imagined something at the bottom of the lake had recognized me, and that frightened me in a way I had never felt before in my life. I didn't dare admit it, but there was also a part of me that wanted to hear it again, to understand it, to capture it in a photograph or a recording that would serve as refutable proof. Perhaps it was my journalistic streak or the passion that drove me to uncover mysteries, but at that moment, it was difficult for me to differentiate between professional curiosity and real risk. Tomas noticed I was quieter than usual. He tried to suggest I find another approach to my photography project, capturing natural beauty, gastronomy, and handicrafts. He was sincere in telling me he didn't want me to get lost on a dangerous path, but I, silently, insisted on continuing my research. On the second to last day of my stay, I decided to hold a night vigil at a secluded spot on the shore near Santiago, where it was said they sometimes saw lights emerging from the lake. I urged Tomas to accompany me because I didn't dare go alone. He agreed on the condition that if the notary had notified me, we would leave just after sunset with some food, flashlights, and my photography equipment. The location was a small clearing on the shore, surrounded by trees and rocks. The stars began to shine brightly above us. The lake stretched majestically and silently ahead. I kept a small fire going and we chatted about light topics, trying to relax the atmosphere. After 11, Tomas became tense and made a sign to me. Silence. We heard something like a murmur over the water. I hurried to grab my camera. Although the darkness made it difficult to capture anything, my hands tingled. Tomas, his face rigid, pointed toward a spot where the water seemed to shimmer. Sure enough, there was a faint glow on the surface, a pale, diffuse light, almost ethereal. I held my breath and tried to focus the camera, adjusting the ISO and shutter speed. However, the lens captured nothing but absolute blackness with a distant flicker. Then this light moved as if someone were floating at chest height. Tomas grabbed my arm. Trembling, a shiver ran through me as I realized the light was moving toward the shore, our direction. I wanted to back away, but my legs wouldn't obey. The sound of a whisper, carried by the breeze, began to envelop us. I couldn't make out any clear words, but I sensed something like, come here. It was a silent, hypnotic invitation. Tomas reacted first and shook my shoulder to make me see reason. We have to go, Ines, don't come any closer. But for some reason I didn't understand, I wanted to stay. I wanted to take a step closer to what was moving in the lake. My curiosity drove me on as 1,000 survivalist thoughts spun around in the midst of that internal conflict. I noticed the light beginning to dim, as if it were slowly sinking. Then, for a few seconds, something protruded from the water. I couldn't tell if it was a hand, a humanoid shape, or simply a wave, but that movement was enough to make me feel fear. A dreamlike shock. Tomas practically dragged me toward the clearing, away from the shore. The light disappeared and the whispering faded. Only the sound of our hurried exchanges and my panting breaths remained. We ran toward the path that led to the village, lighting the way with the flashlight and without looking back. Dawn broke and my nerves were still on edge. I felt I couldn't stay any longer at the lake without risking my sanity. I asked Tomas before leaving to take me back to Don Gregorio. I wanted to say goodbye and tell him what I had seen. The old man greeted us with his usual calm. When I told him what had happened, he felt it almost without moving. It seemed like nothing could surprise him at that point. The lake spoke to you and you decided to leave, which is quite wise. Many aren't as lucky as you. I asked him if it was indeed the guardian. He responded with an enigmatic tone, "The guardian is only a man. In reality, other things inhabit those waters. Some say that your heart is restless. Tormented, the lake projects your anxieties, your fears, and ends up calling you with your own voice. Sometimes that projection takes on a visible form to tempt you in, and if you give in, you become part of the lake." My blood ran cold. I realized I'd long been burdened with the guilt of leaving my family and everything to pursue a professional dream away from home. Perhaps somehow the lake had sensed my remorse and exploited it. So, should I listen to myself? I asked in a whisper. Don Gregorio nodded contentedly. "If you've accomplished what you came here for, the lake will let you go, don't doubt it, but don't forget to always show respect to this place." That same afternoon, I packed my suitcase and said goodbye to Tomas, thanking him for everything. I took the boat back to Panajacal and then continued on to Guatemala City. I had enough photographic material for my project. Images of great beauty and powerful testimonies about the local culture. However, I didn't feel euphoric as I had imagined. Rather, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness, a part of me. I wanted to understand more deeply what was happening in the depths, but I knew that if I had persisted, I could have suffered the same fate as others. I spent the next week reviewing the photos, listening to the recordings. The audio file contained only a barely audible murmur alongside my gasps and my heartbeat echoing in the microphone. I showed the file to some friends and none of them could make out a clear word. To them it was ambient noise, the wind hitting the microphone and nothing more. I wondered if my mind had. I shaped the photographs into indistinct noise and found professional success. A gallery in Madrid agreed to exhibit them and I received good reviews, but whenever someone asks me how they were, I hesitate. And I went to enjoy the view. I just smiled and gave a polite answer. I never mentioned the whispers, much less the nighttime experience. It's been a long time since that trip. I clearly remember last night, that whisper that almost dragged me toward the lake, the strange light that moved on the surface in the hand that was peeking out over the water. Sometimes in my nightmares I see myself standing on the shore, moving forward, hypnotized, and this time Tomas doesn't come to save me. I've read a little more about the Mayan worldview and the beliefs surrounding lakes and volcanoes. I understand a little better the idea of these places, which are seen as entities with a life of their own, places that can heal or hurt some bond that a person forges with them. Lake Atitlan remains one of the most beautiful places I've ever visited, but also one of the most disturbing. I know that for many tourists it's an anonymous haven of picture postcard landscapes and relaxing afternoons, but for me it became a mirror where a whisper resonated, calling my name, inviting me to merge with the water. When someone asks me for advice about visiting Atitlan, the first thing I tell them is to respect the lake, to respect its silence and its depth. I won't recount my entire experience as many people look at me in disbelief, but deep down I wonder how many others there are. I've heard that murmur. And how many more have answered the call, unable to escape.